Hi, I'm Edward and this is my channel Moving Matter. Today's video is called Adrenaline, the Soul Killer. So first of all, what is adrenaline? Adrenaline is a stress hormone produced by the adrenal glands. In males, it's also produced in very small quantities in the testicles, but primarily in the adrenal glands in men and women. So basically, this is the key hormone in the body that creates the fight or flight response. So the sympathetic nervous system is where the fight or flight response is generated. These are traditionally called the masculine energies. The counterpoint to this in the body is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is called the feminine energies. So in traditional Asian cultures, like Asian religions, I should say, or spirituality, you'll often see references to yin yang. You'll see things like fire energy, water energy. Fire energy is the masculine, that's the sympathetic nervous system, and water energy is the parasympathetic nervous system, so that's the feminine energies. So why is adrenaline a soul killer? Like, what does that mean? Basically what that is referring to is that adrenaline is the primary antagonist towards spiritual development and spiritual growth. So on a soul level, the more adrenaline you've got in your body, the more that you are suppressing your spirit. So adrenaline goes hand in hand with the ego. So the greater the level of adrenaline in your body, the greater the stronger your ego will be. And this is because your ego is effectively, it's a redundancy backup system in the human body. It's designed to be to operate as a shield. It's not meant to be working 24 hours a day. It is not the true you. It is not the real you of who you truly are within yourself. So the real you is your soul. That's the true self. However, due to the way that civilization has been engineered and structured, the ego is rampant, and the ego is just, it's a concept. It's not something we can identify within the physical five senses per se. So it's not like, say, a brick where you can look at a brick and say, oh, that's a brick. It's physical. I can touch it. I can interact with it with the five senses. It's not like that at all. The ego is a concept. It's metaphysical in the sense in that you cannot, as I said before, you cannot identify or interact with it. However, it is something you can describe. You can experience. You can feel the effects of the ego, but the ego is, as I said before, it's a concept. So when we have adrenaline in our system, effectively what it's doing is it's inhibiting our ability to really tune into our spirit. That's because our soul doesn't like to operate in an environment where there's stress, there's threats to survival, and so the ego presents itself as the counter to that, where it's all about thinking. It's all about rapidly trying to find a solution to survive. And so the more you're in an adrenaline, ego-driven state, the more that you won't have time to tap into your feminine energies, so the parasympathetic nervous system, and you won't have time to tap into the rest and digest aspect of yourself. So in Western civilization particularly, we can see that the ego is rampant. It's everywhere, and that's because society has conditioned us through foods, through social conditioning, through programming. It's conditioned us to operate in a masculine energy. So as I said before, that's the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. So we're always in this go, survive. Got to move. It's all very root chakra based. And so the ego resides, if we look at the chakras, which are a metaphysical concept, the ego resides within the chakras, in the root chakra itself. So in terms of the ego, the adrenaline being a soul killer, what can we do about this? Like, what are the negatives? Well, the more you're in your ego, the more you're denying the truth of your own reality. And so the more that you do this, the more that you suffer. That's basically what it comes down to. The more that you're within your spirit, the less you suffer. Now, in nature, everything's about harmony. It's about balance. Because the world is so ego-driven, it's become so much about the individual, about the self. People don't feel. So we've almost become a race, a species. And I don't look at the human race as a collection of different races. I think that's all bullshit. I think that that's all designed to segregate, to separate us and to keep us divided because we're easily conquered that way. And so when I look at the human race, I just see one race. We're all shades of the same color. And so the more that we're in this ego-driven, this adrenaline-infused state, the more that we view ourselves as separate from the whole. And so the more that we will find it on an individual basis difficult or impossible to perceive the law of one, so divine oneness. And that really refers to we're all intrinsically connected. We're all one. And it sounds like a cliched corny, airy-fairy, woo-woo spiritual type concept, but it's actually not. It's one of the paramount universal laws, the law of one. Just like the books talk about, the law of one is really, it's all of us connected through our feeling, through our spirit, and being able to sense and perceive each other on another level. And so in order to really have true spiritual growth, you have to look at all the inputs in your diet, all the things that contribute to adrenaline. There's things like excessive exercise, particularly weightlifting, things like that. There's nothing wrong with that, but that naturally, the central nervous system is incredibly sensitive, so that naturally puts your body into more of a fight or flight, mechanical way of looking at reality, of viewing reality. And so the more that you engage in those types of exercises, the more that you're going to have adrenaline in your body as part of the coping mechanism when you're doing that. The other thing is that our foods, because our foods are so processed and there's so many chemicals and they're just extremely toxic and unhealthy, people have just become acclimatized to eating foods that are not good for you. So these foods are all, very interestingly, and it's not a coincidence, it's designed this way deliberately. These foods are all set up and they're all geared towards making you operate within those masculine energies, within adrenaline. So effectively, the foods you're eating every day, or most people, I should say, they won't realize, but those foods are all stimulating your adrenaline. It's on a tiny, potentially imperceivable, subtle level, but that's why it's done like that. It's designed to trick you. The greatest saying that I feel that was ever said was that the greatest trick that the devil ever played was convincing the world that he doesn't exist, and that's so true. And there's a reason why these foods do this. So I'll talk about some of those in just a moment. But when you're not in a conscious state, and this is a trick, it's a chicken and egg type of thing. It's a catch-22 arrangement. So you want to ascend, you want to spiritually grow yourself, you want to do inner healing work, you want to feel more, you want to connect, you want to feel less isolated. But then being in that state, you're already in a state where you're we're all in a state of unconsciousness. Even as we increase our consciousness, we're not fully conscious until we ascend and we completely illuminate ourselves. We clear and balance all 12 chakras, we unlock all 12 DNA strands, and we become completely enlightened. So enlightenment is literally just freedom. It's liberty. It's illuminated. It's in the light. That means that you can see, sense, and feel everything with the 5 senses, and the 6th sense, which is feeling, which is vibration. You can unlock, you can activate, you can view reality from all 6 senses without any restrictions. That's true freedom. That's true empowerment. That's when you've truly reclaimed your spiritual sovereignty, and that you've gained inner freedom and inner peace. And so to get there, we're all in a state of unconsciousness. And so the name of the game is consciousness. And so as we work our way up the chakras and become more conscious, adrenaline affects the body more and more. So when I say that, foods that you could normally eat, things that were like alcohol, caffeine, gluten, dairy, you'll find that as you ascend more and more, these foods have more and more of a toxic effect on the body. They make you tired, they make you worn out, you just don't feel good taking them. They suppress your abilities. So when I talk about abilities, I'm talking about psychic powers and so forth. So this is why adrenaline, like all these foods, stimulate this, because the more that you're in an unconscious state, the more easily you're controlled, the more easily you're able to be ruled and subjugated without even knowing it. And so as you're in this state, you're also addicted, you're also easily addicted to adrenaline, these foods that trigger adrenaline in the body. So for anyone that's done detoxes, diet detoxes, they've cut out chemicals and stuff, cutting out alcohol, caffeine, this is all stuff that I've done, and it's extremely, like, the withdrawal symptoms you have as you do this, it's bloody difficult. And that's because it's not only is it not good for us, but it's all designed to make us feel good in the mind, but not the body, which is not the spirit body, I should say, and the physical body. And so what happens is, as we detox, effectively our body's acclimatized to eating this stuff, which gives us a temporary short-term boost of adrenaline, and of course, dopamine and the feel-good neurotransmitters. So in order to truly engage in our spiritual development, we need to look at all the food sources and cut them out that are triggering or stimulating adrenaline. Because, as I said before, when you stimulate adrenaline in the body, it's triggering the ego. So, I should say, when you consume foods and you have foods in your diet, particularly that fuel the adrenaline in the body, that trigger adrenaline, that stimulates adrenaline. It then triggers the ego, and then what that does is that it runs all the programs inside our subconscious, so subconscious programs. And so if you see people who are like highly egoic, you might see, let's throw some examples out there. Like, let's just go for, say, lawyers or people who work in roles that are sort of have a reputation being particularly egoic. They're very much in the ego. They're unconscious. They will have a lot of subconscious programs running. So like denial. Like a good example would be narcissists. What's happening there is they have a lot of programming, and so they're running a denial program, they're running an avoidance programming, they're running an ignorance program. They're also running guilt programs. That's why when you look at psychologists and psychology videos on YouTube, say for example Dr. Ramani, who's really good, narcissists always fit a profile because they're always programmed in a certain way, and that's why they operate that way. And so as night follows day, you can guarantee that people who are, say, highly narcissistic, they're always looking for stimulation. Same with psychopaths and sociopaths. There's a reason for this. They're looking for stimulation because they're constantly in the mind. They're not feeling. They're not empathic. Doesn't mean they can't be. They can be healed. They can be rehabilitated, and they can become a normal functioning human. They can become empathic and feel and have compassion. It's that they're in such a state of survival and stress and hyper arousal that all they can do is think. So they're never present. That's why if you look at these people and the way they operate, you can see the patterns where they're always creating drama. They're always looking for excitement, adrenaline hits, stimulation. And so effectively, they're the biggest adrenaline junkies of all. And I'm not saying that they're getting on airplanes and jumping off with parachutes and stuff like that. Maybe they do. But what I'm talking about when I say adrenaline junkie is that unconsciously they are always looking for that next hit of stimulation, that next hit of euphoria, so they can feel something. That's why when you study psychology, you'll see that these types of people also engage in risky sex, risky activities. They're particularly psychopaths. Like they flirt with the law, they'll break the law. They don't care. It's because of the rush it gives them. It's that euphoria, that adrenaline hit. It's just so empowering for them, and it makes them feel so good, so alive, that they're constantly looking for the next hit. And so by default, like when I've studied these people, it became very clear to me that we're all looking for our adrenaline hit. We never realize it. So just drinking coffee, where psychopaths and sociopaths and narcissists are obviously at the worst end of the spectrum, but we're all looking for an adrenaline hit. So we're very much a race where we become very unconscious, and we're existing in spiritual poverty for the most part. I'm not saying everyone, but globally as a planet and as a people, we're pretty much in spiritual poverty. We're effectively in hell. And so energetically, because we're all addicted to the ego, and we don't even realize it, because when you withdraw from adrenaline and you start shifting your diet, you start shifting those foods, what happens is you have withdrawal symptoms. And I've experienced this, I'm still experiencing it. As I withdrew from removed alcohol, and I removed caffeine, and I removed pesticides and gluten and dairy and meat and soy. I didn't notice adrenaline hits from soy or anything, but as I removed these foods, I became very aware of the fact that withdrawing from them, it was quite difficult, because I was relying on these foods as comfort foods, and as a result of that, I was going to them to get my fix, like a drug addict. Well, it's the same sort of mentality. It's just on a much smaller scale, so we don't realize it. And so when everyone's drinking coffee, everyone's drinking alcohol, like it's normalized. It becomes become acclimatized to it, desensitized, and so we perceive it as normal. But that's part of the programming. That's why those foods are there. That's why gluten in particular is there. And so there's a really good book that I'd recommend everyone read. It's called Grain Brain. It's all about gluten and how bad it is for everyone. Celiacs like myself are on the worst end of the scale, but everyone's there's health implications for eating gluten that everyone should know about in terms of inflammation and so forth. But it's a stimulating food. So dairy stimulating. As you cut these foods out, you'll find that your root chakra stabilizes. And so the more you stabilize your root chakra, the less anxiety you get, the less drama you have, the calmer you are, the more at one you are with yourself. And so my diet, basically, it just consists of organic raw vegetables, because I've just, in the last few weeks, started cutting out pesticides, like glyphosate in particular. And I'm already noticing withdrawal effects from that. And I didn't even know, I had no idea that you could have withdrawal effects from cutting out all those foods. But it makes sense to me, because these foods are obviously, like foods that contain pesticides, obviously not good for us. But they're affecting our endocrine system, they're affecting our nervous system, they're doing all sorts of negative things for the body, which destabilizes the mind-body-spirit complex. So getting back to the original point of the topic of this video being adrenaline, the spirit killer, this is why adrenaline is so bad for the soul. It suppresses it. It also automatically disconnects you from your higher self. So when you're in that fight or flight, survival, I've got to move, got to survive type mentality, you don't have time to be spiritual, because you're just surviving. It's effectively like you're being hunted by a saber-toothed tiger or something in ancient times. And so that automatically cuts you off, because you're in danger from your higher self, your source of wisdom, and from your soul. Like you're in the moment. You're think, go. And so that's putting you in a hyper-aroused, hyper-alert state. So I would say for anyone that is wanting to spiritually develop, look at your diet. Look at things like meat, because meat contains suffering. And so I'm not here to tell people how they should eat and what they should do. It's just in my experience and the telepathic guidance that I receive, as I have been clearing and balancing my chakras and doing more spiritual work. Only earlier this year, like I'd gone off and on meat, but I just did it because it just felt right to me, and not harming animals and so forth. But I never really, I guess you'd say, I was never really consciously paying attention to the effects it had on my body. So when I went off it, like as I cleared and balanced my chakras, this year in 2021, I became very, very aware of the fact, like when I ate meat many months ago, for the first time I hadn't really eaten much, I ate it and I felt very depressed afterwards. And when I asked myself that question, why do I feel so depressed? Like I didn't even understand it was a meat, and the guidance I received back was all meat contains suffering. And so that made me acutely aware of that moment. Okay, shit, like meat as well. Like, of course, and I did my research, and there's stress hormones in there from the animals. There's adrenaline in there. So it's like on a scientific, physiological level, there is absolutely adrenaline and stress in the meat. So you're just putting more stress into your body. But also, of course, on a spiritual consciousness, metaphysical level, it contains suffering. Those animals have suffered. So as I cut that out, and now as I'm cutting out pesticides, it's been really bloody difficult, because effectively I go to the organic store now, but when I go to like a supermarket, like in Australia we have Coles and Woolworths, my options for what I can buy now are so minimal that there's very little I can buy. But that's probably a good thing. So the interesting thing is, though, as I've cut these pesticides out of my body, the withdrawal symptoms, as I said earlier, like I've noticed it. Maybe if you're doing that and you're cutting it out as well, you may not notice as much, but I noticed it, and I was like, shit, this is intense. I've never cut it out fully. I've always, I guess, had them in my system. I've always had foods that I've consumed every day that have contained this. So this is the first time I've ever done this, alongside with having no coffee, no alcohol, no gluten, no dairy, no soy, no fried foods, and no meat, as I mentioned before. So yeah, if you're serious about spiritual development, looking at your diet and looking at these foods is the most important thing, because the more that you can clear this shit out of the body, and of course fluoride-free water as well as the big thing that I have, and cutting out refined sugars, but the more you cut this out of your body, the effects it has on your consciousness and your ability to receive telepathic guidance and to tune into your spirit guides, and the clarity of that communication is incredible. Like it's like having a computer, if you will, and you upgrade it with a new graphics card and a new CPU, a new RAM, and a new hard drive, and it just works so much better. It's the same sort of concept, but you transfer that into the physical body, because the body is a vehicle. So in summary, adrenaline, the spirit killer, it suppresses spiritual development. It's the number one reason why society is engineered and structured around adrenaline. If you start looking at it from an adrenaline perspective, you'll start to see the signs very quickly. And if you ask yourself, you ask your soul, you ask your higher self, you ask yourself for guidance on this issue, I guarantee you'll start getting pointers on what to avoid and what not to consume. And I can guarantee if you can, it's very, very difficult. It took me several years to do it, but if you can cut out gluten, dairy, soy, fried foods, alcohol, caffeine, you can cut out meat, and pesticides and refined sugars, effectively you're eating the most natural foods possible. Organic raw vegetables, I cook them, of course. Organic rice, organic quinoa, organic potatoes, of course, they're a vegetable. Organic fruits, and you start to eat that way. the way that nature intended, which is very Palladian-like. If you follow the Palladians and the work that they do and people who channel them, if you cut out all this stuff and you actually stick to it, like that's the key thing. It's bloody difficult to stick to it. It takes a lot of practice, as I found. But once you start to do that and just becomes a part of your routine, and that's actually one thing I should mention. When you cut out these foods, you'll have psychological dependencies. So that's the programming. So as you might feel stressed, or you might feel a bit tired or lethargic or whatever, you go for your adrenaline hit, you go for a burger. Nice. We all love juicy burgers. You go for a nice juicy burger and it tastes so great, and it just hits you, and all the chemicals are going in there, and your dopamine's going off, and I'm sure your serotonin's getting affected, but all those stuff in the brain it's wired to feel good from those foods because they're very stimulating. You start cutting out these foods like French fries and pizzas and stuff like that. And even if you eat them healthy, and Mexican, like I love Mexican food, you cut out all the stuff and you stick to just doing it yourself, making it at home, because effectively you have to make most of this food at home if you want to have it and enjoy it organically. You'll notice withdrawal symptoms. So that's when that's your sign that, hold on, this food is it's actually harming me, it's putting me into an unconscious state, and it's having a detrimental effect on my psychic powers and my spiritual development and growth. That's when you know that there's something going on, and that's when you can focus on that, because from what I've seen, everyone's, like I've met many psychics and they'll drink alcohol and they'll drink coffee, and that's fine, like they're allowed to do that. But what I noticed is with a lot of psychics, they don't have empathy. So what I'm referring to empathy, I'm not talking about thinking you can feel. What I'm referring to is feeling feelings, feeling other people's feelings. So empathic, empathy. So as we know, empathic people, everyone's empathic, by the way. It's just a lot of people are energetically blocked up. And your narcissists and your psychopaths and your sociopaths, as I was talking about earlier, they're the ones who are the most blocked up energetically, if you will. And so they're effectively energy vampires looking for their hits of stimulation for their ego, which comes in the form of adrenaline. And they're going around, causing terror for everyone and causing drama because they need the fix, or else they'll fall apart, And so, as I was saying before, when we talk about adrenaline being the spirit killer, this is the soul destroyer. This is the key thing that you have to look for in diet, in foods, drinks, everything. Becoming consciously aware. Is this giving me a hit of adrenaline? What happens if I remove this? When you start to remove foods from your diet, like selectively and consciously, and you start to see how they impact you, and then you remove one, you may not notice anything. Yeah, I'm handling this. Then you remove two, then you get to three. Like cut out gluten, watch the side effects, and then psychologically watch yourself when you suddenly can't eat a chunk of food. You can't socialize. Like everything is structured. So hence why it's a matrix. Everything's structured so that from a perception, mental perspective, you're plugged in, you're wired in, and this is done on a mental, spiritual, and physiological sense. And this is not a coincidence. So I'm not saying that the guy that runs a restaurant or the woman that runs a restaurant is secretly trying to wire you into the system. What I'm saying is on an energetic level, almost a karmic level, deep down, things have been structured a certain way so that meat is the prevailing food is the prevailing food out there, and dairy and gluten, and you look at these foods, and alcohol and caffeine. This is not a coincidence. So society's engineered this way, and so it's designed to keep us plebs, if you will, in an unconscious, easily controlled, easily lacking self-awareness state, and that's why it's done. So I would challenge you, if you want to try this, try cutting out these foods and then watching the programming, watching the psychological dependencies, the barriers, and trying to overcome those. It's bloody difficult, but then that becomes, in my opinion, a form of shadow work. Because it's like, why is this affecting me? Why can't I have control over my system and manage myself and feel good without depending on that bit of food? Like, that's a dependency. So the minute you're dependent on something, you're playing into an ego game. So the ego is always dependent. It's always looking for new stimulation, and that's why it's the ego. But the soul doesn't do that. So you feed the ego, you nourish the soul. So that's just my thoughts on adrenaline, the spirit killer. And I hope you like this video. If you've got any comments or questions, feel free to let me know in the comments below. And if you like this, please like and share it. If you didn't like it, please dislike it, and hopefully you'll let me know why. And it'd be great if you would subscribe. And if you'd like more videos on this topic, or would like to know more detail, please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.